This is our monthly rental income dashboard. It's currently on revision 5.3. I'm going to go through a tutorial and overview of the product and kind of walk you through how to use it. So before we start, we'll go over the password tab. So there is a password to unlock the file. The password, however, does not unlock the first two tabs. So the About tab and Password tab are locked using a different passcode that we don't provide. However, this password will unlock the rest of the tabs in the workbook. If you do want to unlock it to change colors or change fonts, etc., there's a link in the file. So you can click on it. It'll take you to a short 2-minute YouTube tutorial, and it'll walk you through using that password. Now, I will note you do not have to unlock any tab in order to use it. Everything that you need to interact with is either white or like a beige color box. So either be an input or a drop down, and those aren't protected. Everything that's gray or blue or color coded is usually locked. It's a form that's protected for a reason, to protect the file. But you do have the option to unlock it if you'd like to. On the dashboard, you'll notice there's not a lot to interact with here. So we'll start with just the currency. You can update this depending on where you're at. You can change it from US dollar, euro, pound, or Canadian. And then you're going to set a period start date and end date. And we'll come back to this because it's not going to add much value now. And it really won't until you start getting this workbook populated. But this period start and end date is you're setting the dates, and you can, for any date range that you'd like, as long as you have that information existing in this workbook, you can track your average monthly expenses and average vacancy rate for that period. So you can change these dates. As an example, I'll do that. So if I were to go to 8/21, so I don't know what months that is. Let's pretend, let's see, period start date, period end date. It's not going to change. It's not going to shift anything because I only have a very limited data set in here. But depending on, how many months of information you had, if I went to, I guess it might. So if I change this to, let's say 10/1, I have no idea what's in the workbook. I don't remember. Yeah, so that went to 0. Whoops, that was too far, and I didn't want to do that one. Hit undo. Let's do 10/1/2023. See the numbers changed here. So now they're reflecting only 2 months instead of the full 2 years. So I'll go back. We'll hit undo. Put that back the way it was. So next you've got tax categories. You don't have to spend much time in this, especially when you're just getting started, but there may be something you want to update later. So these tax categories will provide your drop-down tax category list in your detailed expense tracking for the properties. So as you're logging expenses, you can log which kind of tax category that falls into. And then at the end of the year, when you're ready to do your taxes, this will simplify, take you much less time. You can pick your tax filter start and end date, so you can choose your different years, and then you can choose the property. So I've only got 2 in here, or actually really just the one as an example. Rental 2 is empty. But had you had multiple ones, I'll go back to that detailed expense tracking, I'd be able to select that property, and my tax information will populate just for that property. But again, there's a little over 20 different categories you can add. These are the most common ones you'll find when you're doing your taxes that the IRS will ask for. So next is the data table. We'll come probably back to this a little bit. There's nothing to interact with here. This is a visual to kind of guide you through your workbook. All the rental tabs will be numbered, so they don't provide a lot of information, but this is your hub. So you can see the rental tab name and then the actual property information and what it's pulling from each tab. So when you're coming in here and you want to, especially if you got multiple rentals or several or over 20, this is where you're going to want to come to kind of your starting point each time you come to the workbook to know, hey, look, I need to make some updates or add some stuff to 214 Beach Street, so I know that's rental tab number 1, and you'd be able to do that to the rest of them. So rental overhead, Really simple tab, but you're going to add in your overhead costs. So a description, who the contractor or vendor is. Again, you can choose your tax category, and that's from that same tax category list. How many times you pay that cost per year, how much you pay, and then it's going to give you an analyzed cost, and then you've got a room for comments. So what this will do though is this is your total overhead, let's say to run your rental business. So if you got multiple properties and you've got some overhead costs, you've got an LLC, you got business licensing, you're paying for property maintenance on 3 or 4 of the properties, however the case may be. Or maybe you're paying for a lawn care service across all of them. So what this will do is it'll take your total annualized cost, you plug in your total rental units, and then it's going to allocate that total annualized cost to a monthly value for every unit. So in this case, nearly $167. So when you're reviewing and tracking information within the rental tab, this overhead cost will populate, and I'll show you that in a little bit here. Detailed expense tracking, we'll come back to that in a little more detail. We'll go right to the rental tabs. So on the rental tab, you're going to start we'll go left, right, and work our way down. So rental name, 214 Beach Street. Keep this something simple. An address is really easy to follow, but if you want to name it whatever, something else, it doesn't matter, as long as you know what it is, and it'll populate up here to the right. So at any given time when you're in the workbook and you're on the rental tab, you'll know exactly which one you're working on, in case you get they're bouncing around, because this workbook will get busy as you add more rental tabs. You've got a monthly rent amount, so this is your target rent. So always make sure this reflects the current rent that you're targeting, and then your rental square feet, and that will, between these two values, you'll see over here to the right, you get a current rent per square foot, and it just gives you a visual if you're you can compare across multiple rentals and areas. Say, hey, look at what what areas will give you more rent value. Current rental financing. So if you do have, if you are borrowing to pay for the rental, you've got your financing information, your straight and loan term, and then current property taxes and insurance. So what's your annual taxes and what's your total annual insurance for the property? And that may be a combination of flood insurance or PMI or whatever the case may be. So renter property valuation. So you got property balance. So if do you owe any money? Did you borrow money? So in this case, maybe you originally financed 200, but you only owe you have 100 left on the mortgage. And then what's the property value? So this just gives you a total. You'll see that spit out here is your equity. So property balance versus property value gives you your current equity, and that'll show up across all your properties. And then you've got down here, you get a summary of the information over here to the left. So current financing, so monthly financing, $1,074, that's based on this. Monthly tax and insurance cost is the $300, and that's based on this information. And then the monthly overhead allocation. So how you will use this, and you'll notice it's got a lot of built-in notes. So if you hover over any of the red corners, the note will pop up. But you'll use this. So if I were to sum these values, you'll notice the 15. So if I look down here to the right, I had a total sum of 1540. So that's my total expenses. So for any given month, I had an income of 2,200 in this case. That was my target rent. My total expenses were the sum of these, 1540. Now, in the case that I had other expenses that I would track here in my detailed expense log or information, I would add that in here as well. So you'll notice, so February 24, I had a $4,000 total expense. And if I go to detailed expense tracking, looks like I bought a refrigerator for that property. So that just gives you an additional detail. So then for that line item, I had 25, and then we'll go back to the rental tab. And then I might have had some other costs in here, but overall I logged, hey, I had 4,000 in total expenses for that month. So you'll know for that month you were net negative. Now, as you go, so I'll kind of walk you through the expense, this table, and then we'll cover the information up here on the right. So the way this table works, you got income source one. So first we'll say rental start date is when did you first start using this dashboard as one, or a, how long ago, if you have the history and you want to fill all this out, how long ago did you start your rental? So this does go up to, it's got 120 rows. Whoops. So 120, so that's 10 years of tracking, which is plenty of time. You've got income source 1 and income source 2. So income source 1 is information, let's say it's from the tenant. Income source 2, maybe you have subsidized housing and you get some additional income from the government or the state. Paid status, so as you're going through, if they paid, you'll say, hey, it's paid in full. Maybe they give you partial payment, they paid half, they're running behind, and you can say, well, you can track how much they did give you so you don't lose sight of that, but you can say, nope, it's not fully paid yet. So we'll go back to paid in full. And that doesn't do anything on the math, it just gives you a visual. Fees charged, so let's say they've got, this is your standard rent amount, and then they've got pets and there's additional cost for that, then you can put that in here. Or maybe there's a late fee, maybe they paid late. So is the property vacant, yes or no? This is a really important item. So obviously for the months they paid rent, there was no vacancy. But in this month, let's say there was nobody in the house, so that was a vacant month. And your total expense didn't change. So just because you didn't make any money here doesn't mean your expenses, you'll still log those expenses every month. And what that'll do is it'll give you in your average time period performance. So actually, I don't want to drift too much. So that's kind of generally how this table works. You'll want to fill it out as you go. But based on this information and using the vacancy as a perfect example. So average time period performance. So if you remember on the dashboard, you got your period start date and end date. So that gets pulled into the rental tab to say here's your start and end date. And then it's filtering all the information in this table based on those two dates to give you your average monthly income and average monthly expense. So then your net monthly profit in this case was $134. And then your average vacancy rate for this period was 17%. And that's based on, here's the total months I had, and I had 3 months where I was vacant. Now, all-time performance. So remember, this filter is a small set of information based on the table, based on the date selection, and this is the entire table rental of information. So this is total income for the entire time you've ever had the rental. This is your total expenses, and this is your net profit and your vacancy rate across all months. And that's essentially it for this table. And then your rental tabs, all of these are going to be identical. So I guess I'll explain this. Let's see if I can do this and replicate that in one of these rentals. So if I were to, as an example, let's say I made this blank. That didn't do it. I got to remember what. I did tag it. It does want you to note it's either for it to properly calculate the vacancy rate, you got to tag everything yes or no. So that'll flag in yellow if you tag it. If you leave it blank and there's information populated. So let's see, total expenses, average monthly income. So let's say I left that blank. No, it doesn't like that either. Doesn't matter. So I'm trying to remember the formulas I had in here that will trigger this, but you'll see there's a couple of notes. So this provides the average monthly revenue for rental income for the time period selected. So if you get, as an example, we'll go to rental 2, and I'll zoom in so you can see this. So you get a flag. So check input, C note. So what does that mean? And you get it for vacancy rate, expenses, and income. So check inputs, C note. So check dashboard dates. So right now as an example, these are getting flagged because there's nothing in this table. So let's say you change these dates and then you're not pulling in any information for that property. You can come in here and look. And if you're getting flagged, it's simply because, in this case, that the dates you selected, your current rental information exists outside of that date range. And so number 2 is check values in columns D, E, and G. So income source 2, and then fees charged. So I'll go back up here. If you had months of 0 income and fees, set the value to 0. Do not leave them blank. Okay. So in that case, so you'll notice it's got some in here. But if I were to as an example, if I take all this out, let's see, delete, delete. Now I just got a flag. So what it means is it doesn't see any income. All these are blank, so they're not even zeros. So if I plugged in, if I just pre-populated 0, it would think it was a 0. So that's the reason the table, standard table, is left blank. There's nothing in it. So if you put a 0 in, it's going to think that was intentional. So I'll undo that and put all that information back in the table. But it will, as you're using the table, it will flag you in certain ways to let you know whether if you're not using something properly or you missed something filling something out. It'll kind of tag that for you. And as another note here, so monthly overhead. This is the monthly overhead allocation from the rental tab, rental overhead tab, which we covered. And then you'll see record these values plus the detailed expenses each month. So as I noted, you'll want to take this sum, so the 1540, that's your total expense, plus anything you have in this detailed expense tracking. And I'll kind of cover that now. So for the detailed expense tracker, this is items that are outside of the norm. You know, tenant called and you had to have a plumber show up, or you did some extra landscaping, you did some remodel, whatever the case may be. You can track all those detailed expenses here for each property. You can tag when you spent the money, so that'll get pulled into, so you'll have that history. And then you can choose each, so based on whatever tabs you even have in here, it will populate those property names here, and those will be, you'll be able to select from those property names in this detailed expense tracking. So whatever's in that table, you can select from. So you can tag the property and the specific expense and the tax category. And then over here to the right, you get a property total. So for this property, I've got a total of expense, all-time expense for this date range is $2,500. So if I were to change this range, as an example, this is 2/1/24. So if I were to change this to 3/1/24, this number should go to a 0 because this expense fell outside these dates. So I'll put that back. Oops, there you go. So this allows you to change the date, select the property, and then you get a detailed expense summary for that date range and that property. And this is a really nice feature when you're when you're doing taxes at the end of the year or just looking at detailed expenses. You just want to kind of get into the weeds a little bit. This allows you to do that pretty quickly. Now, you'll notice there's only 2 rental tabs and there's a template in here. And this dashboard will allow you to have up to 25 rentals. So how you add rentals is actually really, 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 really easy. So you'll right click on the rental template and I'll hit move or copy, create a copy, and I'm going to move it to the end. Now it puts it right here. And I'm just going to name this to the next sequential rental number. So I'll say rental, and this name matters, so make sure you can keep these names the way they are and keep them in order. And no spaces, don't change them. So rental 3. Now if I go to the data table, you'll see now rental 3 is saying update property tab. So now it sees it, it pulled it in, and I'll just have to come in and start populating it, and that information will pull into the table. Now let me show you one other really, really neat feature. So let's say, we'll go back to that data table. So rental 1 is pulling a bunch of information in. Let's pretend for a scenario, just for as an example, that you wanted to sell this property and you're buying another one. Because this taps out at 25. So I've got it set up for 25. It just keeps the dashboard less busy, the data table a little less busy, but 25. However, let's say you sold this and we're going to buy another one. Well, you don't want to delete this tab or create a new workbook or whatever the case may be. All this history would be nice to have. So that's all you have to do in this case. So you see this button up here to the right, it says link to dashboard. It's literally all you have to do is I can go up here and hit no. I don't want to link it. And then I can change this to say rental A, right? So maybe it's retired rental, whatever the case may be. Actually, you know what? Let's not do that right this second. I'll leave it rental 1 just to show. So rental A. So if I go to the data table, it says rental 1, so it sees it. Whoops. We'll go back to data table. So it sees the property, says link it. So it knows a tab exists, but it's not pulling any information in. So what that feature actually will do, I said this, I kind of mixed this up. So what that feature will do is it'll pull that information from your tab. So if you're just trying to get an average or a summary, or trying to look at, hey, you know, did I perform a lot better without that information in my you know, my total sum of how things looked? You can kind of link and unlink that. Now I'll go back to rental 1, and if I change, I'll go back to yes. So now if I go back down here and change this to, I just rename it rental A. Let's do that. Go to my data table, and now it says add new property tab. So I kept all the history. I didn't break anything, and yet it is, everything's still here, but it's no longer pulling into my dashboard. So now I just cleared a space to add another property when I sold that one. And that's, again, that's all you have to do is rename it in this case. It's a rental 1. So some pretty neat features with, you know, how you can use that and use that data table to play with properties as things change over time. Now I think that's pretty much it. I'll go back to the dashboard. So what you get across all your rentals, all the information as it populates, you get average monthly income and versus expenses. So what's my income versus my total expense? And then you'll have your average vacancy rate. So, you know, this creates a nice visual for property to property is, you know, do you have a property that's stands out way more than the others, or are they all pretty much the same when it comes to, you know, in terms of vacancy, depending on location, etc. And that's really it for the rental dashboard. So we do have a PDF that comes with every product. It will likely highlight a few things that I missed to, you know, forgot to mention or didn't say. So, you know, be sure to use those if you purchase. But if you have any questions, shoot us a message. And thanks for watching.